So I'm just going to take a second, even though I have 75 slides and however many minutes. This is a photo from Cadillac Ranch. It has nothing to do with the IETF, but since I stood up here last time, I bicycled from Chicago to Santa Monica, and I just wanted to thank everybody here in this community who supported my fundraiser, sent me cheery emails, read my nonsense I wrote from the road, and all that sort of stuff. So thank you. I really appreciate your support. Anyway, onward. And if you get to go there, it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's still pretty cool. And the photo makes it look a lot prettier than it is. Because it's literally just a bunch of cars stuck in the dirt, covered with paint. Okay, so this is just one IETF meeting, IETF 102 in Montreal. It's super high level. I have 75 slides and 30 minutes or something. So I'm gonna skip over some stuff. A lot of it's the exercise for the reader. Yeah, so there's that. So this really funny thing, whether you like it or not, popped up on the V6 Ops mailing list. You should check out the URL because it's really pretty funny. Anyway, enough of that. The chairs of the V6 Ops working group challenged us all to read a draft a week from the July IETF until now, or until the next IETF, like next month. So I've been reading an RFC a week, which, boy, that's super fun. And so I have a couple of slides about a couple of drafts that I think this community would be interested in. We're now deciding to talk about terminology in RFCs and whether it's offensive or not, which is pretty entertaining. Master, slave, those sorts of things. Not sure how you fix that, and I'm not really sure how man in the middle is offensive, but maybe it is or maybe it isn't. Anyway, you might want to follow that. So drafts I've recently read, there are two, they're sort of interrelated. But basically, one of them is a survey of kind of all the RFCs that reference what a prefix length should be on a point-to-point link, sort of so that maybe nobody starts hard coding them, because it really should be a prefix and a mask and not an actual /128 or /127 or whatever. So they're trying to kind of put all the information together so that you know where all the references are and what you can do and what you should do and shouldn't do. So there's a point-to-point one, there's an end site one. I don't know why this one has a lot more text, but anyway, they're both basically the same thing, an overall recommendation and a reference to all the other RFCs that reference what a prefix length should be on that particular medium. So you might want to check that out. So IEPG is an operators group that's been meeting at the IETF now on the Sunday before the IETF for, I don't know, 25 years or something. And it's always been from 10 o'clock till noon on the Sunday before IETF, so much so that I didn't look at the schedule for the past IETF, and I showed up at 10 only to find that because of the World Cup, it started at 9. So I apologize that I missed two of the most contentious and argumentative presentations that I got to see later in a much more calm and non-yelling state. So for those of you, I'm sure that Rudiger was there and probably Jeff. I missed the whole screaming match that I heard about later, so I'm sorry about that. But the talks will be covered in, I think it's Site or Ops. So here's some of the topics that we talked about at the part of IEPG that I went to. And I'm just going to skim through these. Let's see. So this is basically, they're looking at, I think it was Igor that wrote the draft that talked about how you could melt down a denial of service attack, melting down a network by just doing a scan to see how many hosts are on a /48. And then your queues fill up and you roll over and it's all bad. And so they're looking at how different approaches to prevent that from happening. And one of the really common ones is just have a prefix per host, and then there's only one thing on that network, and it's not a network where you're looking around to see how many different things are out there. So let's see. There was a prefix hijack that recently happened in May where an AS announced a bunch of prefixes that happened to be anycast prefixes for a certain ISP, and they were configured in such a way that you really couldn't fat finger it, so it looks like this might have been a malicious attack, and there was a whole presentation about it. I can't remember who did it. Let's see, they're looking a lot at what's still not right for the key signing key rollover, and so they found a whole bunch of stuff in GitHub that some of it was real, some of it wasn't real, and it's been cleaned up. And I have another slide in another working group where they talk some more about different things that they're doing. I think the rollover is supposed to happen, is this October now? So it's supposed to happen soon here in October, so we'll see how that goes. Crazy. So DMAP, October 11th, wow, that's like next week. Oi. So this DMAP is a crawler for the DNS and looks at what's broken. And they did the slides at the bottom, they crawled the DNS and .nl and looked at what was broken. And I think you can get it and do it yourself. So you might want to check that out. Let's see, so global access to the internet for all. So those of you who are wondering about community networks, this is where they're all hidden. They're all hidden in Gaia, okay? Every talk in this working group is a community network. They do exist. We always have been wondering about that with the community networks policy. They do exist, and they're all in this group. So yeah, that's where they hide them. And 49% of the people in the world aren't connected, so community networks are the way that's going to happen. So TACANet is one of these networks, and I think the most entertaining thing about his presentation is that he made an antenna out of a wok, like a wok that you stir fry in. It's super cool, and he had a picture of it. And that's what grassroots community network stuff is all about, taking your wok and making an antenna. Super cool. Let's see. These guys are doing online training to help those remote networks, and there's a 6-week training course that you can do, and they also train trainers, so that's something to look at. And I've talked about QuiFiNet before. It's another community network. And then these guys, they're building a community network that's LTE, but they're not using it for phone service. So it's basically LTE for data, but the users are using WhatsApp and Skype and things like that for the phone part of it. So they're not really sure exactly what to call themselves because they're really not a telecom. They're not providing phone service. So anyway, it's another community network. They're all hidden here, I tell you. There's a ton of them. Okay, so this is one of the working groups that really hurts my head. So they're trying to combine link state and distant vector routing protocols because the link state protocols are too chatty in a really dense data center, and they don't want them to be so chatty. So they're trying to do this link state BGP thing that, I don't know, I'm still having a hard time getting my head around it, but basically that's the gist of it, is that they're trying to make the data center networks not so chatty, but still get what they need. So yeah, and these are all more of that stuff. And then BGP, eBGP neighbor discovery is another thing I'm still having a hard time getting my head wrapped around, because if you're eBGPing with somebody, you need to have an agreement, and you need to know whose routes and who's paying and who's not paying. And so maybe you discover the neighbor, but you're still going to have to configure a whole bunch of stuff and approve of, but they're working on eBGP neighbor discovery. Anyway, it hurts my head. I go there though because it's interesting. So I have a really short DNSOP presentation this time because a lot of the talks are repetitive. I saw that one and a different one and already covered it. So when I was going through this last night, I was thinking, why is there only a couple slides? But it's because it's covered other places. So this was one of the drafts that was discussed. And they're a lot of the processes they're working on trying to see what's broken in the DNS and what isn't broken. So the technical plenary, I guess there was only one DNS ops slide. The big news for the IETF, so I've covered the IASA process before. Basically, the IETF has decided to form its own LLC that'll be a legal entity within ISOC. Right now, they're just an activity of the Internet Society, but they're going to form their own LLC because right now, since they're an activity of the Internet Society, they can't even sign their own contracts or make their own deals for hotels. It all has to go through ISOC. So there's actually a nomination for people to sit on the board of the new LLC that will be the governing body for the organization. So that's something to follow. The other big news is on Fridays, I guess there are no actual meetings at the IETF. There's like this ad hoc, like maybe you meet people and you have a meeting. So I'm wondering if that means I just get to go home and my presentation's shorter. We'll find out as it goes on. So the other technical plenary thing, there was this BOF, and the IAB didn't follow their own process to form the BOF, but they had a BOF about, and this is the slide about the BOF, about what to call an RFC, the different kinds of RFCs, whether an informational RFC should be called an RFC or whether it should be called something else. And since the way they formed the BOF and the RFC editor wasn't really included in that, got people really, I don't know if you've been to an IETF, but people get very emotional about certain things, and this was one of the very emotional things. There were long lines at the microphone, there were the, you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have done this. So they've agreed that the RFC editor should have a really huge say in what RFCs are called, and that was a big moment for all of us. Anyway, I guess I'm trying not to make fun of it, but it was emotional. There we go. Anyway, V6 operations. So V6 operations is all about IPv6 and IPv4 coexisting and making sure that the processes and the standards are there to allow that to happen. So at the newcomers thing the other night, somebody had mentioned that there are a lot of, that we should always consider the problems with dual stack networks, but it turns out that more and more networks are just V6 only, and there's a long list of problems when you have a V6 only network because a lot of the equipment is still expecting V4 for something, or it's waiting for V4 and it has to time out with V4 before it'll do V6. Or it does everything in V6, but boy, you better not update your software because you need V4 to do that. So there's a long list of things that don't work in a V6 only network. And so, everybody's sort of trying to figure out, like how do we solve these problems? And so they're starting to just put together a list of all the things they've seen that are broken if you don't have V4. Let's see. And this is just some world IPv6 trends, a percentage of V6 in various countries. I'm not going to go through all of it. Let's see. They're still working on the requirements for IPv6 routers and customer edge routers, and there's RFC drafts that are working on those things. Let's see. This is how do you get a NAT64 address. Yeah, and there's a whole lot of work being done with multiple, in V6, you might want to have multiple addresses for your host because there's tons of addresses, so maybe you'd want to have an address for each different service or a privacy address for some things and a different kind of address for other things. And then if you have all these addresses, how do you know it's the same host? So there's a whole lot of work being done just on all of that kind of multiple address corp. Let's see. And then there's this little bit of brokenness with DHCP where DHCP doesn't really know that you have a connection, and if you lose your connection, you have to wait till your lease expires to get your V6 back. And so there's some work being done on that because it should be connectionless, but it really truly is kind of broken for V6. So. Let's see. Okay, the measurement analysis of protocols. So I went to this because there was no V6 thing going on and it looked interesting. And this is where all the measurement stuff kind of starts in this research group. and then maybe it makes its way to the IETF proper. So there's a lot of different sorts of measurement things that go on that are being talked about. This one was also talked about in IEPG, so I won't go, but this is the mapping of the DNS. So we've talked about buffer bloat before, where your buffers are too big and then everything gets stuck in there and it slows everything down, or maybe your buffers are too small. And these guys are starting to measure what can you find out about somebody or a network if they have buffer bloat. Can you figure out where it is? Can you figure out how bad it is? Is it really a privacy concern? That with armed only with ping, you can learn a lot about somebody's network if it's got buffer bloat. So there's some work being done on that. Let's see. This is more monitoring of the DNS and also packet. There's a whole lot of issues right now with V6 and packet size and fragmentation and having the network know what your MTU is. And so some of the, I'm sure that some of the reordering stuff has to do with that. Let's see. Oh, and this is the same, what I was talking about before. How do you tell if it's the same machine, if it has multiple IP addresses? Let's see. And again, more path MTU stuff. So maybe you use, there's a whole bunch of mechanisms that are being proposed to fix this in V6 because the packets are so large. There's either encapsulation or there's extra headers or there's all these different things that make the packets really big, and you get fragmentation and the fragments get dropped, and maybe you want to be able to send a packet that says, oh, my packet's too big. If this gets truncated, then change the MTU. So there's a whole lot of work being done to try to figure out what the best thing to do there is. Let's see. Yeah, so you can buy botnet attacks. I thought that was super cool. I think maybe if I don't like you, I might try that. I don't know. We'll see. Let's see. So this is more, there was a DDoS attack in the DNS, and if your TTLs are just the right length that are long enough, then you can still serve stale, and that helps mitigate the DDoS attack. So there's work being done to try to figure out what the best way to go about it is and how to make it so that you're still serving up DNS if you're being attacked. Let's see. This is more about the key signing key rollover, and in this measurement they said that 8% of the devices out there are still screwed up. So we'll see what happens on October 11th. Super excited. Maybe it'll get postponed again. These I'm not going to go into a lot of depth with. This was another group that I went to just because I was curious and I didn't have a V6 thing. So let's see. Yeah, so this is a DNS over HTTP. There's some stuff going on with that, and a lot of people use Cloudflare for that. I'm not super an expert on that. Let's see. Okay, so DPrive is the DNS Privacy Exchange Working Group, and they're starting to, with RIPE Atlas, they have DNS over TLS in the probes now, so you can there's going to probably be a lot more research with transport layer security and DNS, which will be really interesting. A lot of work gets done because of the RIPE probes and the data they gather. I have one at my house. I think there's 2 in Wyoming. Not that we have anything going on in Wyoming, so. Yeah, again, this is multiple IP addresses. So making sure that you can decouple the DNS query from the IP address to make it more private. So maybe you don't really want somebody to know that you made that DNS query. So this is work being done to try to make it more private. Okay, so HomeNet, the group I like to make the most fun of. I'm always amazed at the fact that there's things I think that surely they're solved. And then there's a new draft to solve the problem that I could have sworn, like, why would that have not been solved? But right now there's a lot of work being done with DNS in the home net, and how do you use DNSSEC in the home net, and how did the keys get there, or do you need it? And so there's a whole lot of work being done for that, on that. And these two drafts are both interrelated. So one is from the outside in, and one is what your data is going to be visible from the inside out in your home net. This one, again, is how you distribute DNSSEC keys to make DNSSEC work in a home net. Let's see, do you have an authority? Yeah, anyway, I don't know. It seems like I don't know, home net, I'm baffled sometimes about how complex your home net really needs to be. I guess that's the thing I struggle with about some of this stuff. But there are a huge list of unresolved problems. And then there's a problem where if your IPv4 uplink goes down, it takes a really long time before you switch to v6, and maybe you never do, or maybe HNCP, the networking protocol in the home, has to unconfigure all your internal v4 so that v6 works. And so there's some bugs, like features going on there that just, I don't know, I just marvel over it. So this is 6LO. 6LO is basically v6 over all the little teeny tiny gizmos that have no memory and barely power, and maybe they're battery operated, just all that little stuff. And yeah, so, and for this community, I mean, they're working a little bit to encode hardware addresses in the v6 addresses for these little devices, so that's something that affects address space. And then there's problems with fragments in these little gizmos too, because they have a teeny weeny bit of memory and they have little resources, and you get this giant packet and it doesn't know what to do with it, doesn't know what to do with the fragment. So one of them is about, does it forward fragments, and the other one is about, how do I recover a fragment and make a real packet? This was the fascinating part about it. They're starting to do all this interoperability with all these 6LO implementations and all these little gizmos, and almost none of them interoperate because nobody can implement all of it because they're little teeny constrained devices, and we've put like tons of stuff in there. So almost none of them interoperate, and they're working on ways to figure out how to make it so that they do, because they're little and they have no resources. Okay, so v6 ops are standards for v4, v6 coexisting. v6 maintenance is the group that deals with the v6 protocol and what changes need to be made to the protocol just in general, not to interoperate with v4. So it's more work on the protocol itself. And there's header work always being done. And they're generating addresses to make eavesdropping more difficult. Let's see, what else is going on? Again, the packet too big issue with the MTU. So this is a proposal to solve it, where you send the packet was too big message, and if it's truncated in a certain way, then the MTU, the devices change the MTU. So that's happening in 6-man. This is a lifetime thing where you want the lifetime to not to be less than 2 hours, but if you're a point-to-point link and there's only one thing that could be on the other end of the link, you don't really need to have that. So there's a draft to make it so that you don't have a long lifetime on a point-to-point link. Let's see. Yeah, so this is the router advertisement extension draft that talks about service continuity and mobile hosts. Okay, so CIDR operations is where the two presentations that I missed in IEPG happened, and they were super polite and really pleasant. So I think I missed the yelling and screaming part, and I got the super pleasant part, which is really good. So in the RPKI, they're recommending that you don't use max length for the prefix that you put in your ROA, they're saying you really should put the prefixes in your ROA that actually exist, because max length leaves you open to a certain kind of forged origin hijack, where you have these prefixes that are in your ROA, and if you just smush them into max length, there's other prefixes in there that you're not actually using. So they're recommending that everything that's in your ROA is something that you're actually going to be advertising. Oh, and then in this case, so say you have a POP that you control that has a whole bunch of routers, and maybe they're doing route reflecting or whatever, and maybe you don't want all 100 of them to validate the routes. Maybe you just want one of them to validate the route and then tell the other guys, oh, it's okay. That's what this draft is basically a way that you can save the overhead of having to validate routes on every single router in your POP. Yeah, it's really effective if you have a route reflector cluster, because then you don't have to do it on all of them, and they're all basically doing the same thing anyway. Let's see, and then this is more, so say you have some prefixes in an autonomous system, and you delegate you tell your ISP that you're going to be the one originating this ASN. This is the authorization that gives them the authority to advertise, to speak on behalf of your ASN. Let's see, and then so there's the provider authorization, and then there's the piece that, the certificate that attaches the prefixes to it, so. Okay, so there are a lot of people complaining about the RPKI. Last time I talked about how they had a whole little meltdown because there are 5 routes, and there shouldn't be 5 routes, and nobody told them there were going to be 5 routes, and I don't know, even though everybody told them there were going to be. So these are some of the current complaints, that it's not production quality. What happens when a normal user installs it, and we tell them to tweak it, but they're just a regular user and they don't really understand how to tweak it, and maybe it should just work when you install it. There's a big complaint about the RIRs and how they don't have 24-hour knocks. So if something breaks, there's no one to call, but of course it's all free, so how do you fund a 24-hour knock when it's a free service? And so anyway, there was a whole presentation about some long outages, and at least there was a compromise that they made the lifetime of the cert long enough so that it could survive a week-long outage, but still, I guess there are outages longer than that. So, and there are some other folks here who were in the group, so if you want to add something to any of this, let me know at the end. So this is basically the trust anchor role piece that I was talking about earlier that was missing, and they're working on some software that'll just roll the trust anchor. Okay, so this is the Advanced Networking Research Workshop. Used to happen the Saturday before IETF, and now it's sort of intermingled with the IETF, so there's like a track that's going on all the time, and I tried to stick my head in whenever I could because some of the talks are really interesting. So, it's all kind of futuristic stuff like networks running themselves, but still it's pretty interesting work that's going on and a lot of really enthusiastic people. It's all, the ones I went to this time were a lot about networks running themselves. Yeah, and then the Internet Research Task Force open meeting. So there were 2 or 10 or 8, I don't know, people who got the Advanced Networking Research Prize for their papers, and 2 of them are presented at this meeting, and this one fascinated me. So I've heard blockchain be likened to taking a chicken, hacking it to be taking a chicken McNugget and making it back into a chicken. But, and you can get your head around that. That's probably impossible. But there are ways to hack the cryptocurrencies with BGP. So there are 2 different attacks. There's one where you can delay, so one part of the network doesn't know that the coin's been spent, and it gets respent. And then there's a partitioning where, you know, one part of the network gets sucked over here and these guys don't know about it. So it's really interesting paper, and the woman was quite a good presenter, not like me. It's really a good read, because you think it's super secure, but there are ways to hack it. And then this is my constant, like, I really don't want my car to talk to your car. I don't care. I don't want it negotiating with your car, but they're working on inter-car communication, and one car letting the other car know that, you know, the route over here might not be good, and that sort of thing. And I don't know how these two ended up right at the very end, but I think I am right at the very end. Okay, so this is where you find all this stuff. If you have any questions or you can't find something, sometimes I do one of these and it's 2 IETFs and people don't know, so I've tried to be more specific so that you can find the drafts. Usually if you just Google like whatever I said in the first bullet, you'll get the draft. There's a video on how to go to your first IETF, but if you're going to your first IETF, definitely tell me, because I'll help you out. And this is again from my bike trip in Oklahoma. It's an old water park gone awry. Anyway, any questions? Comments, corrections?
Microphones are open.
So,
yes,
Owen DeLong, Sail Internet. Going back to your comment about not wanting your car to talk to other cars, I'm going to make the argument that you do. For many years now, the reason that we haven't had airliners having mid-air collisions is a thing called TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System. Mm-hmm. And it is a little device required in every airliner that transmits its position and listens to other airliners transmitting their positions. And if they're starting to approach each other in an unfriendly way, the two TCASs actually negotiate and provide a resolution advisory to the pilots, and in some cases will actually activate the autopilot and avoid the collision.
Right, but that's a little bit harder to hack than my car going down the road.
Actually not. It's a pretty simple radio message in clear text.
Oh, okay, well, there you have it. I feel super safe now.
Can I take?
Does anyone have a train schedule?
Can I take the train back to Virginia?
Lee
Howard, thanks for reminding me about the drafts that I have to write, Kathy. That's great. I appreciate that. And one of those drafts was about the things that are hard to do when you do a V6 only network.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to solicit more information, because I mean I think that I also. The list that you had, I think, was mostly things that I said, and
yeah.
All of those I had fairly easy workarounds for, but I'm looking for other people who've done other things in V6 only and have, you know, that I should also add to the operational advice.
Right, because it's shocking. Like, you don't even think about the fact that it might be still dependent on V4 for some stupid little thing that, like downloading software to your phone or whatever.
Right, Yeah, Windows Update, for instance, you can reach the server to find the updates, but you can't actually download them. Stuff like that.
So if you come across any of that, let Lee know, because we're really trying to enumerate them and then solve them. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kathy. Okay, that concludes the first start of our morning program. We're now going to take a quick break.